Hello, and welcome everyone to the Insights podcast series from Accel. I'm your host, Anand Daniel. On this show, we offer up straight talk on business, entrepreneurship, and self improvement through stories and conversations with some of the most brilliant startup founders, business thinkers, and industry leaders from around the world. If you want to learn more about the series, you can head to insightspodcast.in. My guest today is someone I've known for more than a decade. Neeraj Arora is someone who is known for his pivotal role at WhatsApp as an early employee and his chief business officer. We chatted about his career moves from India Times to Google and then onto WhatsApp. At that time, his move to WhatsApp was a very non obvious move, but he talks us through what made him do that. We also talked about his time at WhatsApp and some of his key learnings working with Ian and Brian at WhatsApp. And finally, we talked about the multi-billion-dollar Facebook WhatsApp deal as well. And finally, we also covered some of his experiences from investing in India over the last few years and some advice from him to the startup founders here. Let's dive right in. Neeraj, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking time early in the morning, California time. Really appreciate it. And I love your new COVID look, I guess, with the beard. Welcome.
Thank you for having me here, Alan.
Pleasure. Maybe I'll start out with an interesting question or observation. Your LinkedIn says lead QA engineer in your profile top. What does that mean?
I like testing stuff. So lately I've been tinkering with a few things, some new projects. And I put together a small set of people who are building stuff, and we're just prototyping and testing new stuff. And I'm the one who is always the lead tester on everything. So that's why I call myself the lead tester, lead testing QA person.
Was that something you enjoy doing and you did that during WhatsApp and all through, or it's something new you're picking up?
No, I think all of us used to do that because we were a very small team. Even Jan and Brian used to do that. In fact, I think Jan's bio on LinkedIn might say something similar. So I think we've always were very passionate about making sure our product works well, and all the engineers and everybody, business folks and support team, obviously, and everybody were making sure that the little things were always working well. So yeah, we like doing that.
Good to hear that. I paint my founders I work with testing the app, so I'm not alone in this. So
Yeah.
good. Cool. So we'll start with your background. So maybe your early education. Tell us a quick background about your early life, where you grew up, schooling, anything you want to share.
Yeah, I think pretty standard, nothing extraordinary. Lower middle class family. My dad used to work for the Indian government, and my mom was a teacher. Pretty basic, nice schooling, and till class 12, I was in Delhi. Actually, beyond that as well, but my basic schooling happened in Delhi, and there was a lot of fun, early, simple days, and till it became serious that you have to prepare for one of the competitive exams, engineering, and that's when I think I finally realized that you have to work really hard to get in one of these really good institutes, and that was cool. Went to
Where
IIT
did
Delhi.
you grow up?
I grew up in Delhi, western part of Delhi, near Punjabi Bagh, and most of all my schooling was there. And then I spent the next 4 years in Hoskas, where IIT Delhi is.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty amazing experience as well. Yeah.
Got it. Great. I think when you went to school, there were a lot of other founders or soon to be founders from your
Yeah.
batch. Who are some of them? Yeah.
I think my class, not a whole lot. I think maybe a lot of them actually moved here for masters, and they started something. I think the first crop started around Binny and Sachin, starting Flipkart. I think it was 2006. I think something like that. You would remember better than me.
Yeah.
But they graduated around those. I think that's when the real I think a few years after me was when the real startup entrepreneurial energy started in IITs, and there were a bunch before that as well. There's obviously the legendary ones like Khoslas of the world, but
Mhm.
that's also IIT Delhi. But I think more in a more systemic way, where people looked at starting something very seriously, and it was not something that was discouraged or not encouraged. Like it started happening in, I would say, mid 2000s. I graduated in 2000, year 2000. I think a few years after me is when it all started coming together, and people wanted to do something right after school and college, right? So there's a bunch after that. Like there's Dipinder of Zomato. There's like
Yeah,
you can just I can
lot of them. So it was
a huge
slightly
huge
after
list.
you, right? After your
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Got it. So you graduated and went on to Accelion, right, as one of the first engineers there, and then
Right,
went on to do an MBA and started working in India Times, in their
right.
investment and corporate strategy. So how did the maybe just walk us through the that
Sure.
phase of your career? What made you do those moves?
Right. So actually, the fun fact there was that after IIT, my first job was supposed to be Infosys,
Hmm.
and Infosys was a pretty hot company back then, or but it was also very large, and I think that's what actually was my worry of going to Infosys. I just like small setups and places where um, it feels like you are actually having an impact and you can see what you're building.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's pushed me to look for something which was not a typical go join a established big company um, in India. And luckily, one of our seniors from IIT Delhi had started a company in Singapore, and he came looking for engineers to a campus, and it was completely him and what he was doing, and I had no clue what startups are. There was not a whole lot of startups back then,
This is
and
2004.
this
Which
was 2000, year 2000 actually.
2000? Wow. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, this was actually at the peak of .com in the US. Um, so we would hear stories of Google and stuff like that back then, but we never really experienced something of that kind in India at scale. Uh, so yeah, so long story short, I said Infosys is cool, but it's too big for me. So I spent exactly 29 days in Bangalore at Infosys, and then
Hmm.
I went to Singapore to join this little thing called Excelion. It was called something else back then. They renamed to Excelion, and that was a really fun experience. They were building Dropbox back in the days
Okay.
when there was no Dropbox. So any kind of and it was more enterprise focused, where if you have to do some sort of a file delivery remotely to some part of the world, you have clients. They were enabling that. They were building a smart cloud, um, and that was a really fun experience. Also, a tough one because the moment I joined, a few months later, everything came crashing.
2001. Yeah.
Um, and luckily, this company survived. So we were able to survive that whole thing, and got to a decent size and scale. And I spent 5 years in that company, and then I was missing I was missing the India scene a little bit, and this was the time when India tech scene was starting to happen. There
Hmm.
was all the big US tech companies were setting up shop in India, and they were getting more active. There was a little bit of a startup scene going on, um, and so in 2005 I moved to India to do my business school, um, and that was more of not my want to go to a business school. I don't think business schools are for me personally was something which I had planned. It was just like going back to India and figuring out what I wanted to do next. So it was sort of like a break time for me to understand the ecosystem as well as pick up some business education while I was doing all that. Right. So I spent most of my time um, figuring out what I will do next, and classes were happening in the background while I was there in Hyderabad. So yeah, I think
I
and I joined. Yeah, ISB, and I joined India Times right after that. India Times was sort of like a big daddy of internet and e-commerce at the time, where they did everything from content to ads, commerce, email, everything. Right? They were travel. They were one shop that did everything. They were the original super app or super
Yeah,
website, you can call it.
yeah. Super news, super app, everything. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they did everything.
yeah.
And what that also meant was that a lot of things were broken. So we were hired into a team that was uh, tasked to revamp a bunch of things at India Times. So we relaunched email and did a bunch of other things for India Times. And I spent 18 months. Last, I would say 9 to 12 months was in the investments team, um, because they had a very active investment program where they would invest in emerging technologies, which India Times was not building themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I got some experience on how do you evaluate companies and invest and look at your investments and all that, right? So that was pretty cool till I found um, Google US was looking for corporate development folks for India, for the Indian region, and they had one person, Samir Sood, who was head of the region, the whole Asia region, and he ended up hiring me as the second person for the region. So that was like when I started getting exposed to a lot of stuff that happens in the Bay Area and globally through Google. I joined them in 2007 in India, and that's when the early stage ecosystem in India was getting active. Erasmic, came around at the same time, which became Accel, as you know. Um, and
And you had
we
early backers of us. Thank you. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that was a really special experience because
yeah.
our main job at Google was to acquire companies for Google in India. And after looking at everything that was happening in the ecosystem, very quickly we realized that there's not enough happening for us to acquire. Right? There were some companies, but not a lot, and a lot of those companies were not product companies. Right? So that was the whole thesis, that we will go and find managers, early stage especially, and back them and become LPs in early stage funds. And out of that, Erasmic came out, Seed Fund came out, and Venture East Tenet came out. So we ended up doing three seed funds. Personally, for me, that was a great experience. Again, looking at how early stage investing happens in India, and we were lucky to be associated with Erasmic at the time. And um, some of the really good companies came out of that era of the
Yeah.
seed funds that were formed, right? So yeah, I think I pretty much fell in love with, like, how you take an idea and a team, early team, and help them and give them a little bit of capital to start and see them grow, right? Um, and then in 2009, I relocated to, or like located to, I moved to Mountain View uh, in the Google Corp Dev team here. And that again was more of an economic decision on part of Google, where they said, like, all the remote teams, because we're not acquiring that much outside of the US, move to the base. And even though I had no plans to move to the US or work in the US ever in my life, but that opportunity kind of I wanted to see how things happen in Bay Area. It was very exciting. It's like the mecca of tech,
Mm-hmm.
and we had heard stories of how Google, Yahoo, and all these really cool tech companies got started, and how the ecosystem is so vibrant, and there's so much energy. And so I think for me that was the the driver of coming here and experiencing, like, at least getting to see. So I thought, okay, I'll just go spend a few months or a year and come back.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am, 11 years later, sitting in the Bay Area,
The valley. Yeah, we want you back here,
because
man, sometime. Yeah.
yeah, I think this
Yeah.
place sucks you in.
Yeah.
It has this. There's no place like the Bay Area in the world, and now I think the last few years, my passion and work has been more targeted towards how do we make sure India has the ecosystem and the setup to build companies, just like Bay Area has, right? So
Yeah.
that was the reverse back, circle back to India, to make sure that we have like everything that you need to enable really awesome founders to start awesome companies and help them scale the companies globally.
Got it. You've covered a lot of ground there. I want to rewind a little bit. So
Yeah,
the move from India Times to Google, I get, and then moving to the Bay Area, that's also straightforward. But the move to WhatsApp, was it an obvious move at that time? There were there was Facebook messengers, like a lot of other options, right? Walk us through that transition. And you are pretty early in WhatsApp, right? So
right.
maybe help us through. That was a pivotal career move there, and you timed it well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think um, I'd been at Google for 4 years, and last 2.5 years here in the Bay Area in Mountain View. It was a phenomenal experience. It was, life changing for me to be able to see so many companies and startups and getting to know the founders and learn from them, and some amazing product leaders at Google, um, and see all the innovation come out of Google and outside, right? And be able to acquire a bunch of these companies into Google was like an amazing experience. I learned a lot, and more
2009 to
than
11, right? Or
yeah, 9 to 11. And
yeah.
more than I think just learning the acquisition process, I think I was able to see and witness how founders think about building companies, right? That was like eye opening for me. Like how the ecosystem is so supportive of founders, and the mentorship network that they have, the availability to capital that they have, how it encourages risk taking, and how people think so much outside the box. There are no rules, as long as you're willing to experiment and take a risk and break the whatever the rules are. People are very encouraging and support you, and um, so I think that was like an amazing experience for me. And I spent 4 years at Google, and I was itching to um, go back to something which was smaller. And Google was a pretty big company, and my team was small, and we were doing really impactful work for Google. But my itch was to go to something which was really small and was building a product, and I could touch and feel it myself and
Hmm.
see my users using it myself, right? So when you are at Google at that level, at such a big company scale,
Hmm.
it's impossible to see what comes out of your work, right? So that was the itch, and I had no plans as such to, okay, I'm gonna go do X. It was more about, I was always very curious. So I was meeting a lot of companies anyway, through my job, and some of these companies would really pick my interest. Right, there was these companies like Dropbox and Airbnb and Square, which are like these behemoths here right now. Like they are like billions of dollars worth and thousands of employees now. Right, those were little companies back then,
Hmm.
um, and they were breaking out. They were the new hard, attracting the best talent from the valley kind of companies, and some of these companies would pick my interest, and I would go spend time and understand what made these companies special. So I was like looking around and like passively, and until these two founders at WhatsApp, which was very early. It was like 5% company. Nobody had heard about them, myself included, had not heard what they were doing or what WhatsApp was. We were trying to acquire them into Google because Andy Rubin, back then, who ran Android and who was the founder of Android, wanted to build up like a default native messaging app into Android. And so that was the idea, to bring some team, a small team, to enable that, something like iMessage for Android, right?
Hmm.
Um, so that was the idea. I met a few teams. WhatsApp was one of them. It was difficult to find them. They were hidden somewhere in Mountain View, but thankfully they replied to my cold email. And I spent some time, and we gave them a bunch of offers. They declined everything. They just wanted to build their own thing. They had spent like 10 years each at Yahoo, and they saw like how big companies it's difficult to innovate and move fast, right? So they just wanted to control their own destiny. So they said, okay, we like you, but we don't want to sell the company at this point, right? It was too early for them.
They had
So
raised capital
respecting,
by then, or
they had not raised any capital
okay.
by then, so it was really early, and I just fell in love with everything they were doing. The two founders and how they thought, and how even back then in 2010 they wanted to build a global company, right?
Mm.
Um, and the more time I spent with them, I got convinced about, you know, how they thought about the world a few years down the line, right? Even though there were a lot of messaging companies out there already, but their approach was pretty different, right? Um, and that kind of like made me, you know, ask them for like, can I come help you at WhatsApp? And I was a business guy, but then I'd, transitioned from being an engineer to more of a person who would focus on the business side of technology, right? So the first question they asked me was, "What will you do here?" Right? Everybody in this company is coding, including themselves, both of them. So what are you gonna do? So I was like, "Yeah, that's a good question. Let me go back and think about it." When I went back to them a few months later, I stayed in touch with them. My pitch to them was very simple. I said, as founders, you end up doing a bunch of things every day that you don't like or don't enjoy doing because they're not engineering and product driven tasks, right? As you build, I mean, you know that you've funded so many companies. Like there's so many things the founders do every day, which is not core to the product, right? So my pitch to them was very simple. Like I'll take all of those things off your hands, and I'll do it for you, right? And they liked that idea actually, to the point that Jan started writing down everything that he didn't like doing. And it took me so long story short, it took me a year to convince them to hire me.
Wow. Okay.
So I finally joined in 2011, and they raised Series A in the middle. And I joined as the first business guy, and the team, I was employee number 20, I think. Something around that. I think employee number 20.
But
And
when you
my
wanted to
job was
join, they
very,
had 5 people. Yeah.
if I had joined a year earlier, they had 5 people, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's fine. I think it was the right time for me to come in because the company was, growing, started to grow. It had a lot of investor interest. It had a lot of partnership interest. There was a lot of other things which were happening, which was just not product. And I think the day I joined, Jan actually sent me a list of things which he had made and said, okay, this is your. So they never explained. There was no like job profiler as such. It was, and that's what I really liked about the whole thing. It was very much like, it felt like my own thing. It felt like I'm joining to, create certain new things which are not happening in the company, like partnerships, and um, think through a lot of other operational stuff in the company. Um, and yeah, so the next 7 years was spent, helping the founders build and scale and do a lot of other things in the middle. Yeah.
That's great. So that was a phenomenal run. Maybe we'll cover some of the firsts when you are with WhatsApp, right? A few of the firsts. Like talk to us about your first meeting with Ian and Brian, if you remember it.
I think Jan and Brian first meeting was when I was at Google and we were like trying to understand, right, what they did. I remember one thing very clearly. Jan was very quiet in the meeting, and Brian was talking a little bit. And so I think they all, it was very obvious that they didn't want to share too much about what they were doing with Google. And so it was like an awkward meeting of some sort where I was asking them a lot of questions and they were not really forthcoming.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of learnings there, right? How do you deal with corp dev of a big company, right? It was a classic case study of that, and that's what I really like about Jan and Brian. They're, even though they are engineers, they really know how to deal with a lot of other things which are not product related, right? So the whole process, the way they ran the process and dealt with Google was pretty phenomenal, actually.
Got
Um,
it.
yeah, so the first few meetings were like very awkward, and they did not open up to me because I was from Google, and so they were being very careful. Yeah.
Good. Few more first rapid fire. First tricky, tough decision that you had to make at WhatsApp.
First tricky decision. I think it was sort of a Jan Bryan me decision, but it was the most tricky thing I think we did early on. This is the time when WhatsApp was starting to grow in a bunch of countries. It must be 2012 or 13, something. 12, I think, late 12 or something. And Samsung was the big daddy of Android back then. It still is, but it was like the big daddy. Like it was like the biggest, the most important Samsung Android um, um, maker.
Yeah.
And they came to us and they said, "Look, we want to preload WhatsApp in a bunch of phones. Why don't you work with the, why don't you give us your app and we will just put it on our phone so that in a lot of countries it's a much better experience to just start using the app, but going through the app store, downloading it. And back then, all these issues were, pretty big, right? So obviously, it was like a no-brainer for me. Like I was like, okay, uh, when Samsung comes to you and wants to preload your app onto their phones, and they have massive distribution, that's like a lottery ticket, right? That's like the best distribution you can get, or not the best, I would say, like the easiest distribution you can get. But we ended up saying no to them. And that was like not easy, obviously, which also meant that there were obviously multiple risks to saying no. Then one was that you give up on all that free distribution that you will get from Samsung. That was one, obviously. Two was you as a little company, you were trying to burn your bridges with Samsung, which is not easy, right? And all of those things happened, right? We said no to them. They didn't like it. They ended up developing their own messenger. I forgot the name. It was pretty bad, actually. And they kept on pushing it for years and years and didn't go anywhere. But the whole, going back to the tricky part of this whole thing was, the decision was made because the WhatsApp was very organic, right? So in the sense, we never spent any money, marketing dollars to acquire users, right? So everything, all the users that came to WhatsApp was word of mouth, pretty much, right? And that this was in the same vein where you said if you create artificial distribution where somebody looks at the phone, buys a new phone, and sees a WhatsApp logo on it, and they don't know what it is, and they go through the process of installing it or registering it for it, but they don't have any friends to talk to, or they have like two friends to talk to. It's a very bad experience, right? So I think the main decision, we had to forego distribution for out of box experience for the users, and that was a very difficult decision, but I think the right decision in the long term. So I think it goes back to how do you build a company and a product for the long term, right? It's very easy to fall for easy, quick growth, spurts, and you say, okay, yeah, I'm getting this free distribution, might as well take it. But what you don't think about is you get a bunch of these users that install your app, you start using it, but did not stick with you because they had a bad experience, right? So we said, we don't want all this artificial distribution. We will come back to it when our graph is big enough that somebody installs the app and they had a much better experience. So we actually delayed all these pre-installs for at least a couple of years. And then I think 2013, 14, we started doing it, and it was a much better program for us. So yeah, long story, but yeah, that was probably the most
Decision,
tricky,
yeah, I can imagine.
tough one
Maybe
that
the
we had.
last of the first, your first meeting with Zuck of Facebook.
First meeting was Zuck was at his house, I think. Yeah, I think that's what I remember as my first meeting, where after I think about 2 years of like back and forth, and we had been delaying talking to Facebook about a deal, and we basically said no, we don't want to sell the company. And eventually I think we got to some sort of a handshake in 2014. between Jan and Zach is when Jan called me, said, I think we have a deal. Why don't you come over? Um, and we'll talk about the next steps. So that's when I think I met Zach for the first time at his place, and it was sort of like a happy environment because we just handshook that we're gonna merge the company with Facebook, and we just talked briefly about what is gonna be the next, how are we gonna announce it, how are we gonna do the next steps for to execute on the deal.
Got it. Great. Maybe when you talk about this deal, it's one of the biggest and a very small company, a number of in terms of number of people, and like talk us through the deal or anything closest to your heart from that aspect of your career.
I think it was the moment I joined WhatsApp. It was very clear to me that Jan and Brian wanted to build an independent company for a very, very long time, or at least forever, right? Because there was no questions. We never entertained any inbound about M&A. Like we would flatly not even
Take them.
discuss it or talk about it or entertain it, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a bunch of really good inbound from WeChat, Tencent back then, Ponima, like from all quarters. At some point from Google as well, and uh, we would just dismiss it and move on. Like we just said, we have too much to do, and we are just focusing on building the company, and will not discuss it, right? So uh, it just happened, and we were raising our series, I think C at the time. Yeah, Series C from DST was happening. We were, going through the term sheet, and I was working on that, and suddenly, the Facebook activity picked up. They came to us with a very, very strong um, offer. Not only in terms of price, I think price was one part of it. It was more about how did they envision the two companies coming together. I think that was the main part, right? How our visions aligned and how WhatsApp would thrive within the Facebook family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And would be given the independence to build what we wanted to build, and will continue to do it post independently. I think that was the main reason why we thought uh, it's worth discussing this deal now, because it gave us what we wanted. It gave us the ability to independently execute on the product and grow it and monetize it, and that was the main driver for us. So we kind of came to this fork where we said, okay, um, we have to decide. This was now big enough offer. It was an interesting enough offer. The way it was, um, being discussed, where we kept our independence, where we had the support of Facebook, and and the price was enough for us to think about whether if we have to go public in a couple of years or a few years. We looked at how, like, companies in our domain, Twitter and a bunch of other companies, would go public and would list at some certain price, certain valuation, market cap, and I think looking at all those parameters and looking at how the deal was being proposed to us, looked like a really, really, good win-win-win for everybody, for Facebook, for us, for the users of WhatsApp. And that's when I think so I think it was a master um, in deal making from the Facebook side as well, in the sense that they knew what we really cared about, and they were able to do it for us and for our users, right? There was no plans of integrations of like combining the products or anything, and that was like important for us. We wanted that ability to quickly execute on the product and the business side of things that we were envisioning at WhatsApp. So I think definitely a very creative and bold, I would say, deal making.
Yeah.
And that was, you saw the result of that, because when we sold the company In 2014, we had 450 monthly active users, million monthly active users, so close to half a billion. And I think we doubled or tripled like in a few years from then. So it kind of shows that our speed of execution actually went up. Um, and this was not because we got any distribution or anything. It was we were completely separate and we just executed on our plans. It was just that we were able to hire aggressively. We were able to get a lot of other technical help from Facebook on the storage, on the server side of things. They brought a lot of those things that we were trying to build ourselves, and they already had in the ecosystems of Facebook family, right? So combining the two actually really turbocharged the growth of WhatsApp. Um, so I think it was, I would say, execution was flawless in terms of the deal.
Awesome. So when you joined or when you started tracking in 2000, when was that? 11, 10, 11 time
Yeah,
frame. WhatsApp had how many users?
I think when I first met them, they were sub 10 million users. I think I would say, I don't
Exactly.
remember
So
exactly.
10 to
It's
10 to
been 10 years.
450. Yeah, that's fine. That's one
Yeah,
phenomenal journey, man. 10, 20, whatever million to a billion
yeah.
plus users. That's a phenomenal journey. Congrats. So maybe last question on this. In looking back, any key uh, traits of Ian and Brian that you think really stood out for you, for the founders who are listening, and from the journey?
Yeah, I think I touched upon that a little bit. There was a lot of them actually. I learned, it was like a masterclass for me to see
Mm,
them operate, and I learned so much from just being in the same room with them on key decisions, on looking at them, how they hired people, how they made big decisions for the company. Right? It was absolutely, I couldn't have asked for a better class to learn how do you build a long term company and a product that people love. Um, and I'll touch upon a few things. I think the first and the like, it's such a simple and obvious thing, but a lot of founders forget about it, or don't pay enough attention to it, is how much you obsess about the user,
mm,
right? And this applies more to your consumer startups, but I think some flavor of it also applies to enterprise and SaaS, because you have you have a user, right? In the end of the day, you're building a product for somebody, right? Whether it is for a company or for your end user, right? And I saw that firsthand when I joined. Um, there were like a lot of emails coming in from users that they had issues with because Android was pretty unstable, and a lot of flavors of Android back then, and it was a really unwieldy operating system. Um, and so I think a lot of these product related stuff, that my product is not working, or some issue with it, or it doesn't deliver messages on time, or something, like there were some issues every day that people will email us about. And Jan and Brian went through each one of those emails themselves, each one
mm.
of them. They would read all of those emails, and I'm not talking about tens and hundreds. I'm talking about a few hundred emails or thousands of emails every day,
Wow.
right? So there was a barrage of these things that came in from all over the world in different languages. Sometimes they were not in English, right? So they made sure that all of those early feedback that we were getting, whether they were bugs or other feedback or feature requests, anything, whether they didn't like the color of the app or how ugly it looked or whatever, it was like, it could be anything from a user. Somebody read it, and the founders, they were the ones who were early on, the first few years of the company. They were making sure that they read everything, and they replied, they bug fixed everything that they saw that made sense. And so that obsession with the user was, I had not seen that before
Mm,
anywhere. um, and this is very basic, right? You're building a product for somebody, so you want to make sure they're happy about it, right? So but how, to what level do you go to make them happy, right? Or to what level do you go to make the experience of the app flawless, right? And how you don't care about um, adding new features, and you care about making your current users happy, right? So it was like the focus was always about how do I keep my existing users happy, and not about how do I get new users faster, right? So there's a trade-off, right? Obviously, we don't want to. It's not that we never wanted to grow. So growth is important as well, but at what cost, right?
Mm.
If you're growing so fast and all you're thinking about as a founder every day is how do I grow more and how do I you know make sure I grow faster and more, you kind of lose track of like what is happening to your existing users or your older users. Are they still sticking with you? Are they still happy with what your product? Are they still satisfied with the experience they're getting with the product, right? So it's a good balance. And I saw them do that really, really well, where they would obsess about the existing users, and then they would also do things to make sure the new users are getting in. Um, and the growth was very measured and very controlled in a way. Um, but because there was such a strong, what it did was for the long term, it created such a strong word of mouth and such a strong user, experience that we never had to think about new users. It just kept coming in. And we just kept on improving the experience for the users, and they would bring us new users, and it kept growing like that. So that was, I think, for me, the trade that was so different and so uh, um, strong. It kind of like completely changed how I thought about building a product and a user and a company. And there were a lot of other things. How do you think about the long term, right? You always have decisions in front of you which look good for the short term, might be bad for the medium to long term. They always optimized for the long term. They always thought that we're going to be around for a long time. Let's not do quick wins. Let's not make decisions that help us right now but doesn't help us long term, right? Or could potentially put us in a bad shape in the long term. Um,
Maybe
that
ads or
included,
anything. Any give us an example of that?
I think, distribution. I talked about spending
Yeah,
money to get new users. Distribution, the
yeah,
Samsung deal I talked about.
yeah.
uh, you know, Bringing in, raising capital, how much you want to raise and how quickly you want to raise. Uh, how do you want to talk to the press about the company? There was like tens of these examples of, it was all about the user and the product. Everything else came in later. Like
Got it.
we'll think about telling the story of WhatsApp to the press. It's not important. When we're getting the users every day, why do we care, right?
Yeah,
Uh, so I think, and then a very strong emphasis on not hiring too quickly, and not hiring too many people, and not creating a culture of titles and levels and all that, right? And this would only apply. I'm obviously adding a caveat here. This only applies to certain kind of setups, right? In certain cases, you want to hire fast and you want to create levels and you want to scale and all that, and that's required. In our case, I think the way they built the company was special, and there are a lot of learnings there, obviously.
you guys had 50 odd employees when you exited to Facebook
Yeah,
for
we were
19
55.
billion.
Yes. Yeah.
55, $19 billion. That ratio was like unheard of till that time, and I'm guessing even still then. So congrats, that's a outstanding story there. So maybe switching gears, let's talk about what are you doing these days. You moved to, so you went from investment, you invested in Erasmic or early fund, and I'm sure in other startups and everything. You went in on the other side, been an operator, now back on angel investing. You're an advisor to Venture Highway. Talk us through what you're currently doing
Sure.
in the invest. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my love is to build things, right? I love getting involved with things which have impact, and I could personally spend my money and time doing those things. So for my investment is my time and money. Obviously, those are the two things you invest, right? Uh, WhatsApp was obviously a lot of time investment, and that was really, really helpful in thinking about how to build companies, and I learned a lot there. And when we sold the company to Facebook, I obviously got much bigger teams, and I had a little bit of personal capital to help other founders. And I went back to my passion of helping and being part of journeys of startups from India, because I when I saw the ecosystem in the Bay Area and I saw the ecosystem in India, I was like, India has a lot of promise. Is it doesn't have that level of ecosystem that Bay Area has, right, or China has. So I said, okay, if I'm going to put my energy and my capital to help that, and obviously I can't plug the gap myself, but I'll do everything possible from my side to help. And what that meant is Venture Highway came out of it. So I started that fund with Samir, and I'm just an advisor and LP in that fund because I had my day job with Facebook and WhatsApp. So it became my passion to help and make sure that we have a really world class team and capital helping new companies out of India. And this was early stage again because I thought that's the most critical part of a founder's journey when you are starting up and you have ideas and you have a basic product and a prototype. The kind of help you get, the kind of capital you get is really can really help make or break you and put you on a path, right? So last few years I've been spending some of my time um, making sure that vision continues, and we have come a long way. I started investing my personal capital, and now we are on Fund Two, which is Venture Highway Two. It's a close to $80 million fund, and we have a bunch of outside LPs in the fund as well. So it's been a pretty satisfying and for me also a lot of learning because I'm not an investor. I'm not like I don't think like an investor. I still think like a company operator builder, I would say. So seeing Venture Highway come up, getting built, and become more institutionalized with the proper fund was a new good thing for me as well to learn. But I think I'm very excited about how India has shaped up in the last few years. The kind of talent and energy and speed and not only that, I think the ambition of the founders is I have not seen something like that in my last 12-15 years. I've been in the ecosystem in India, so very excited about what is going on there. And you guys are probably one of the best funds who's been helping uh, the companies for a very long time. So I'm excited to see you guys go from strength to strength.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. So maybe on the investment side, any specific things you look for now that you've gone this whole journey? What really catches your attention as an investor personally?
Um, I think it's still because we have invested at a very early stage, right? Um, my main thing is to look for special founders. That's it. I think you can't really do too much beyond that. That's our learning been. I mean, when we invested in Moglix or Misho, um, there was hardly a product. There was founders and there was a vision and there was ideas, right? Um, so it goes back to backing and finding really special people and founders who are bold and ambitious and are um, you know they care about solving a problem deeply. And when you see that in their eyes is when you say, okay, I think this is interesting, even though the space or the idea, I mean, people think about TAM and to look like, oh, how big this thing is going to become. I think when you are that early, all of those things are difficult to predict, right? And so we spend more time talking to the founders, understanding them deeply, and looking at their resolve um, and focusing on those parts of the deal. And most of our early stage deals have done really well is when we've seen these gems of the founders who have executed really well. And this share chat, there's like many of these examples where really smart, high energy, focused, entrepreneurs, and they had some clue of what they're going to build, but it was not clear to them till they started doing it, and they pivoted a bunch of times to find their what they think can really scale for them.
Yeah, yeah. Great founders find their way, right? So
Yeah,
we've had some of these on the Insights podcast.
absolutely.
Rahul from Moglix and Fareed from Chat Chat. Great
Yeah.
guys. So maybe last question on this section. If you were to build a WhatsApp 2.0 today, would you consider starting up in India? This is a question from when I chat with a few people that I'm talking to you. There's a question that came up.
I could do it from anywhere, wherever I can find a team, a starting team. Um, um, and India has great talent as well. Everywhere, like China, India, Europe, US. Obviously, Bay Area is great. New York is great. LA is great, right? So I think talent is less of an issue now, and capital is less of an issue now. So any great idea could be built anywhere in the world, is what I believe. It's completely a personal preference, I would say. Wherever you feel comfortable building a new company, uh, I strongly think you can build it anywhere in the world right now. Um, and the only thing you have to think about is, if you're building a global company, um, you have to think about, you have to think globally. You can't think specific to that geography, right? And from very early days, you can't say, oh, let me do it for this country and then I'll go out, right?
Mm,
Most often it becomes too late by the time you are ready to think about your global strategy and whatnot, right? um, so I think, even though you can delay and you can stagger your rollouts in other parts of the world, but that thinking and that seed of building a global company has to be very early in you, right?
mm.
So yeah, absolutely. I could do it from India. I could do it from Bay Area, anywhere. Yeah.
No, got it. Maybe ending with a cliched question. The next big thing. Um, what are your top three next big thing ideas?
I don't know. It's a question that I hate these crystal ball questions. I think, because most often than not, you're wrong, actually, and nobody knows what is going to happen. Nobody knew COVID is going to hit. Nobody knew a lot of other things that have changed in the last few months, right? So um, yeah, I think the only thing I know is tech is gonna be even more important of your life, a part of your life, every day, and that is continuing to happen. And a lot of these structural changes that have happened is gonna only increase that move from adopting more technologies, building more products, making your life easier and different, and all that, right? So uh, a lot of things that you couldn't imagine a few years back are now happening, right? Like Uber is a classic example of that, right? How Uber and Lyft and Ola and all of these companies have completely transformed transportation, goes to say that it's difficult to predict, right?
Yeah.
But um, if you have to force me to pick a couple of things, I would say, um, I think healthcare and education are going to change quite a bit with this new reality that we are going to live in, or living in right now. Um, I'm seeing it with my kids. We are always thinking about, how do we now make sure they get to do stuff and get exposed to new activities and education, remotely, and in a way that is safe for them, given the situation that we are in, right? So we'll be forced to rethink a little bit about our education system. I actually don't think the classroom is going to go away, but we'll rethink how can we make the classroom better and remote education better and more accessible and easier, and as good, or if not better than what we were used to when we were growing up. And then healthcare, obviously. I mean, all of these things we are going back to thinking about, okay, um, what can we do to tackle these things better in the future, and all of those things, right? So um, this is a great time to be rethinking our healthcare system and education system, I would say.
Great. So, few rapid fire, maybe quick 10-15 second answers on fun questions. Most frequently used app these days.
I think still WhatsApp. I think I'm just too many families and friend groups, and um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think
It's the same story here, man. In India, for sure. Most interesting piece of advice, information that you came across during the quarantine.
most useful advice. Good question. I think face masks are really important, I think, and useful, I would say.
Yeah, okay,
Uh, I think, yeah, I believe in
good,
that.
good. What is the best part about working from home for you?
The best part is, I think, seeing my kids grow up more,
Mm,
and every few moments. I mean, I'm able to witness that a lot more uh, now that I'm at home and working from home. Yeah.
yeah, so true, man. For all of us, favorite activity for relaxation.
Favorite activity for relaxation, spending time with my kids. and then my older kid is starting to do a bunch of things, um, rollerblading and swimming and all that. Right, to be able to do that with him has been very relaxing for the mind. It just breaks your thought, and it gives you a break. Right, so that's great. That's been great. Um, and I think. Also, I think going back to rethinking a little bit about and doing some physical changes like yoga, picking up yoga has been really good. And because pre-COVID we were so busy and things were like always we were always running. You never stepped back and thought about things, right? So it gave me an opportunity to pick up some of these things, which kind of helped me in relaxation or making sure your mind and your body are fit and relaxed. Yeah.
Great. Last one. Any book, podcast, or any stimuli that's you would really recommend for our listeners that has wowed you in the recent past?
I would recommend don't read too many news. That's bad for you.
Yeah,
That's not my personal experience.
yeah,
uh, I mean, we always used to say that at WhatsApp, like most of the media, what media
yeah,
talks about is wrong, and there's some motive somewhere, and it's like
yeah.
so we are not big fans of media and press and uh, all that. Having said that, I think it's useful for education and all that. So um, you know, I'm a big user of Twitter. I don't tweet too much, but I get most of my news from Twitter. I don't watch TV for news anymore. Um, so yeah, I think knowing what to follow and how do you consume the news and learn new things is important. I think that's I would say I'll encourage people to think about that, but also limit it. I think what we have seen, a lot of these social media, they become too over consuming, and you can fall into that trap of you know going down that path of using it too much. So how do you limit? How do you balance it? How do you read the stuff that can be really useful for you and help you striking that balance? Yeah.
Great. On that note, Neeraj, really appreciate you taking the time. This has been super helpful. I'm sure the listeners are going to find this extremely helpful as well. Thank you and wish you the very best of luck going forward as well.
Thanks, Anand. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Hope you liked that conversation with Neeraj. We covered a lot of ground there, particularly his time at WhatsApp and some of his learnings there, including working with Ian and Brian there and the Facebook deal. And we also chatted about his time angel investing in India and some lessons from there. If you like this podcast, you can find more from the series at insidespodcast.in, and we'd love to hear from you. Best way is to reach out via Twitter at Accel_India. And we'd also really appreciate it if you can leave us your reviews and whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. Thank you.